Welcome to the Heavenly History Podcast, and let's get this show on the road. As always, I'm your host, Preston Marston, accompanied by...
Leo.
And me, Michaela.
On today's episode, we will be diving into South Africa and apartheid,
while also covering a heroic risk-taking anti-apartheid activist, Steve Biko.
And now, before we start, you all need to understand what apartheid even means.
That's right. Today's episode is about apartheid, which was a law passed in South Africa in 1948. Apartheid is a little relevant in South Africa today, but is way more historical.
Let's not jump too fast into the history of South Africa without talking about modern South Africa.
I kind of love South Africa because it has 3 capitals.
Well, they're not technically capitals, but each one houses a different branch of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Split up amongst those 3 cities: Pretoria, Cape Town, and Bloemfontein.
Still not seeing the difference.
The difference most certainly matters to South Africa's 61 million inhabitants.
61 million is quite a lot, placing it in 24th place internationally.
What do all these people do?
I'm glad you asked, because I happen to know that South Africa's economy is made up of ore exports, meaning most of those people work in mining jobs.
That's probably why it's the largest metal producer.
Wow, largest metal producer? Like, globally?
No, not globally. That belongs to China, but the largest in Africa goes to South Africa.
Oh, you had me worried.
We all know you don't have an adequate understanding of world politics, Leo. I mean, did you really think that a country with 32% unemployment rate could be the world's largest metal producer?
Did you say 32% unemployment rate?
I did. 32% of South Africans are sadly unemployed.
Wow, that would mean it has the largest unemployment rate globally.
You can stop flexing your knowledge about statistics now, Michaela.
How about I don't?
Oh no.
Time for the statistics.
Some might even say the materistics. Said it? Anyone?
Just no. Anyway, right into the statistics. We have 20% of South Africa's population is upper class / upper middle class, most of which live in East South Africa with other government officials. 80% are working class / lower class, most of which struggle with basic housing, schooling, water, and electricity. Speaking of people, 60% of South Africans are black, 20% are white, 8% are mixed, and 2% are Asian. I rounded those numbers, by the way, don't question me. Way over 50% of South Africa's monopolies are state-owned companies like Eskom, which handles power / utilities. They make up over 90% of all power generating capacity in South Africa. Seems like I'm out of time, so I'll catch you later with more statistics in the next episode.
Is it over?
It's over.
Finally, we can talk about more important stuff like South Africa's history. Alright, can I get some music?
You don't get any.
Wow, this is just unfair.
How did the British get involved if the Dutch owned South Africa?
Well, after a European conflict, Cape Colony gets annexed by the British. The British then import their colonists to try to make it a more British-friendly environment after annexing the Dutch land. Some Dutch people leave the British-occupied lands and form this Boer republics, whose territory is overlapping Bantu territory, which overlaps Zulu territory, which overlaps British territory. Thankfully, the British sorted out with 3 huge wars, and now all of South Africa is British. Also a little bit of Namibia. The Brits discover gold and diamonds, and now all the racially inferior find themselves working on mines. Speaking of racially inferior, the British just separated the people into 3 groups. We have the Bantu, Asian, and colored. Don't ask me how the unique black races all get grouped into a century-old race, or how all the Indians find themselves grouped with the Mongolians, or how the Lithuanians are grouped with the British Canadians. But it happened.
At least British South Africa was given more self-government.
Yeah, but in an act to legally allow blatant racism, you get the apartheid laws.
The apartheid laws became official in 1948.
The laws are what officially separated South Africa into 3 races.
Even though the Bantu were the majority but received the least rights, having limited education and limited access to skilled jobs, and were separated into 10 homeland zones.
Oh, the homeland zones were a disaster, just like the ghettos from Nazi Germany.
Yeah, they were an area where the Bantu group was forced to live in, segregation from other races. They were usually prohibited from leaving.
Well, the exact law called the Bantu Self-Governing Act was passed in 1959.
Why do they call it the Self-Governing Act?
Just some fancy terms to try to hide how they divide the black political groups across the homelands, so they'd have to fight each other before they could fight the minority whites who controlled the country.
And that's where Steve Biko comes in, being born September 18th, 1946, to Alice Biko in Eastern Cape.
Didn't he have to move when he was 2 years old?
Yeah, he moved to Sahula Street outside of Williamstown, Eastern Cape. That was still 11 years before the Bantu Self-Governing Act.
Williamstown was in a Bantu homeland.
So Steve wasn't displaced and forced to move like other thousands of black South Africans?
He would move as a child again, but he could bear it. He was a smart kid.
I mean, he did skip all of elementary school, going straight to 5th grade.
Yeah, but he wasn't super nerdy. To his friends, he was a mischievous, humorous young man.
But he helped his friends understand complex subjects when they couldn't. Sounds like a nerd to me.
That sounds more like a balanced smart kid than a nerd.
Balanced smart kids don't master math, English at 6th grade. Only nerds would do that.
What's wrong with math?
What's wrong with English?
Research paper.
Okay, come on. Research paper isn't that bad, guys. I'm sure Steve would agree if he even had to do that kind of stuff, because his education's put on ice after 8th grade because of racial injustices, and might have stayed that way if it wasn't for his brother, Kaya Biko, who offered Steve an invitation to a prestigious boarding school known as Lovedale.
He certainly wouldn't stay at Lovedale because he was arrested for association in his brother's crime.
Crime? What'd he do?
Steve had not committed a crime, but his brother was a part of a nationalist group called Popo, which was banned.
He was expelled from Lovedale just because of his brother's association?
Yep, you gotta hate racial injustice.
At least he was able to get into St. Francis College.
But his political story really takes off when he graduates and goes to the University of Natal for a medical degree. Segregated. Many blacks either didn't get a dormitory like their white counterparts or received one with stark negative differences from their white counterparts.
That wasn't just at the University of Natal. NUSAS / National Union of South African Students instituted this policy at almost every university and college.
What can one man do against a whole national union?
Steve Biko's a hero. He took notice of the lack of representation the blacks received. The student councils were made up of white people, with blacks being the stark minority or just being ignored.
This inequality is shown when in Steve's first year on the council, they had already elected to improve dormitory conditions for the whites and Asians, at the cost of removing dorms from the black people. Steve ended up sleeping in the school's church after that decision.
I know Steve Biko wouldn't stand for this type of inequality, especially in a system that, quote, unquote, promotes racial activism. It just seems like they promote one race activism. What can Steve do when the whole system's rigged against him?
You gotta think outside the box. Take risks. Steve Biko is that kind of guy. He remade the whole system from scratch, founding his own called South African Student Organization to provide a more equal organization to represent university students' needs. Steve Biko became the first president of SASO.
SASO did pretty well in providing for Bantu/Black students, including granting medical aid, financial aid, and more dormitory privileges.
Not only did his heroic but risky move provide for the unheard voices of black students around the nation, he inspired them. Students, because of him, began to fight for better conditions, leading to the founding of the South African Students Movement.
He started a whole movement because of his actions, so he's a national figure while he is still in university. I'm beginning to see why he's a well-known activist, standing up for the rights of unknown black students.
This hero couldn't keep his activism contained to just South African students. He founded a whole workers' union, the South African Workers' Movement.
I know he wouldn't stop there. Next, he founded the Black Consciousness Movement.
He's just on a roll from there. The Black Consciousness Movement was the big one that he spearheaded, and it grew all over South Africa.
But all this had risk. He's living under an apartheid government. They were going to catch up with him eventually. His grades tanked with his activism, but he kept taking those risks to fight for the left-out voices of the black community, for equality, for something bigger than himself. The university certainly didn't care, and his risk-facing ended with him getting banned from his school, the University of Natal.
Dang, that's just not fair. Them to ban him just for bad school grades?
There's always risk involved when you try to challenge the whites. When the whites rule, the risk became apparent to Steve right then.
There's no way he'd give up then.
His dreams of being a doctor were crushed. He lost his representative status and access to the National Union of South African Students. He's down in the gutter, rock bottom at this point.
Steve Biko's a hero. He's smart and courageous, and he's not going to let the whites end his story by banning him from some university. That's not how heroes die. That's not how his legacy is going to end. He comes back and he goes for a degree in law at Unisan. It's at Unisan where he gets his big break and spearheads the Black consciousness movement. Cooks up quotes like, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed."
Sounds like some Shakespeare-level quotes.
His popularity is spiking to the likes of Shakespeare. He's getting people marching all over South Africa. You see, the Black consciousness movement was made to get Black people to realize their worth and realize that they're getting oppressed.
Isn't it obvious?
No. You see, the apartheid government's been doing a real good job at getting the Black people to be sort of oblivious to their oppression. That's why Steve Biko is going out and giving these speeches, doing marches. He's the South African Martin Luther King.
But the apartheid government sure does put a stop to his huge shenanigans. They place him under house arrest, as well as 7 other leaders of the Black consciousness movement or its many subgroups. From there, it keeps going downhill for Steve. He moves to his mom's house to serve his second house arrest. His wife moves in for his third, but the pain and bills don't stop when you're under house arrest.
The bills never stop. At least Steve's wife was able to get a job. She had to provide for everyone under his mother's roof.
But the apartheid government hammers him down even more. They basically tell employers not to hire Steve's wife, and she's unemployed for a long while. Life gets real tough for Steve and his family.
That didn't stop him from trying to keep himself high up in the movement. People all over South Africa are marching for his freedom and the freedom of others under house arrest.
I guess the pressure works because he gets semi-released. While he's released, he does more charity work. One of his big charity acts is when he sets up this fund for leaders and heroes like him that are under house arrest and can't pay the bills. Steve gets back involved with the movement, doing stuff for the BCP and attending rallies, marches, and leading speeches, taking a lot of risks.
In the end, the risk catches up with him and he gets placed under house arrest again. This time, the apartheid government sends him threats over the phone, gets people to shoot up the area around his house.
But Steve's a hero. People come to help him out. A group called the Cubans form up to protect his house so he can lay low, wait out his sentence, and be clean.
That's not Steve Biko. He's not just going to break and bend to what the evil apartheid government wants him to do. He's a hero, a risk taker. He breaks the rules of his house arrest and leaves out from Port Elizabeth with his friend, Peter Jones, to a Black consciousness movement meeting.
But that would be the last risk Steve Biko would ever take again. When he came back, the police detained him and tortured him under more harsh, falsified crimes. On that day, 21st of August, 1977, Steve Biko was interrogated and tortured for crimes he had committed and crimes he was accused of. Steve Biko was being accused of every crime ever committed by the BCM, and for it, he was sentenced for terrorism. At the prison, he was sentenced to the guards who brutally beat him and hanged him outside of his cell. He died shortly after his hanging without proper medical support.
Wow, that's really violent. That's, really bad.
I'm a little speechless, Michaela. That's straight up insidious. We're just going to take our ad break. When we're back, we'll open up the phone lines for anyone with questions or comments.
Grandpa Pops give you deals on the food you love. The kind of deals that make you sense.
Alright, welcome back to Heavenly History Podcast.
Coming to you with a fresh mindset off the commercial break. Try to relax your mind after that very gory stuff we just talked about earlier with Steve Biko's death.
One way to relax our minds is after talking about gory topics is with some clear questions and discussions. Open up the circle to a clear headspace with some clear thoughts. You heard me. Come and dial at 248-346-3200. That's right, 248-346-3200. And ask some questions right now at 248-346-3200. Keep your eyes on the road, but if you're not on the road, you can pick up your phones and give us a call at 248-346-3200.
Alright, we have our first caller here. What's your name?
Thanks for picking up. My name's Pearson.
Welcome to Heavenly History. What's your question?
I was just wondering, did they ever punish the people who killed Steve Biko?
That's a really great question. And yes, they did. After a real long wait, 2 decades after his murder, a formal investigation was opened by the Truth Reconciliation Commission.
The police officers that killed him pled guilty because they had no liable reason for killing him. They received no immunity.
Taking my call. I have to go play Fortnite with the boys.
As we wrap up this episode, what conclusions can we draw from Steve Biko's story?
Well, you see, Steve Biko's a real risk taker and a hero. He stood up for what he believed in and wouldn't back down no matter the risks, even when it cost him his life.
You can compare this to another well-known risk taker, Nelson Mandela.
That's true. They both use their political connections from their youth as a foundation for their activism.
Thanks for watching the Heavenly History Podcast, and tune back in for your favorite hosts, Preston, Leo, and Michaela.
As always, we'll catch you in the next episode.
Keep learning, keep growing, and remember, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.